snow hammered against the airplane window like a warning I refused to hear, and for a moment I wished the turbulence would shake loose every memory I was about to face. But then Lily's small hand reached across the seat and curled around mine, warm and trusting, and the world steadied. I could pretend this trip was about Christmas magic for my 7-year-old, but the truth was darker. I was flying straight back into the place where my childhood froze over, into the house where silence meant survival and love came laced with humiliation. The captain called out the temperature in Vermont below freezing, yet the cold waiting for me wasn't in the weather. It was in the voices I'd spent years outrunning. As the wheels touched down, my phone buzzed with a notification from Evergreen Federal, the subject line glowing like an omen: transfer pending. I swallowed hard. I didn't open it. Not yet. Let them believe I was still the worthless, poor thing they'd always sneered at. Let them choke later on the truth. The cabin door opened and a rush of icy wind slapped my face awake. Lily practically bounced down the aisle in her little red coat, excitement written all over her freckles. "Mommy, is there going to be snow everywhere?" she asked. "All over," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll love it." She didn't need to know how much I hated that snow, how it once buried my footprints whenever I tried to run away, how it had muffled my sobs behind the barn door when my father's voice echoed through the walls, calling me useless, dramatic, ungrateful. We stepped into the terminal, and Maple Valley greeted us with the same outdated wreaths, the same flickering fluorescent lights, the same smell of burnt coffee and pine cleaner. 10 years and nothing had changed, including the part of me that stiffened when Lily slipped her hand back into mine, as if she sensed I was bracing for impact. Our rental car was already iced over. I buckled Lily in and blasted the heat, watching the windshield blur into white, breathy clouds. The road out of the airport was lined with silent fir trees, branches low under the weight of snow. Every few minutes, Lily gasped at something: snowmen in front yards, glowing reindeer decorations, a dog leaping through a drift. She was enchanted. I was unraveling. "Mommy," she said suddenly, "was this where your Christmas used to be?" My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Sort of," I answered. "But it wasn't like the movies." "What was it like?" "Cold. Loud. Lonely. Full of rules and knives hidden in smiles." But I only said, "Not very magical." She kicked her boots together thoughtfully. "We can make it magical this time." Her optimism hit me like a gentle punch to the gut. God, she deserved so much better than the place we were headed. Maple Valley's main street came into view, 2 stoplights, the same hardware store, the same bakery with the crooked sign my father adored. I passed the diner where I washed dishes for 3 summers, the parking lot still cracked in the same places. Every landmark was a ghost tugging at my sleeve. As we drove deeper into the valley, I could almost feel my 17-year-old self trailing behind us, thin, scared, clutching a backpack, praying for a scholarship to get out. The Alder House appeared at the end of a long, frost-bitten driveway, glowing warm and golden like a postcard. But that was a lie. The warmth never belonged to me. They'd renovated, of course. Fresh siding, new porch railings, a wide bay window trimmed with garlands. Money I knew they couldn't have unless the anonymous trust transfers had continued helping them through crisis after crisis. Transfers they had never once questioned, not even thanked. As I parked, Lily gasped. "It's huge." "It looks big," I corrected softly. "Looks can trick you." I stepped out into the sharp December air. The cold bit through my coat, but what froze me in place wasn't the temperature. It was the memory of standing in that doorway years ago, suitcase in hand, while my father shouted that I'd be back begging, because girls like you can't survive without family. I'd survived, thrived even, but they didn't know that, not yet. The front door swung open. My mother appeared, first elegant in a cream sweater, her smile polite but thin. Her eyes flicked down my coat, my shoes, the cheap duffel bag. Her expression faltered barely, but enough to sting. "Oh, Grace," she said, as if I were a distant cousin instead of her own daughter. "You made it." She bent down with a softness she never used on me and studied Lily. And this is little Lily. My, you're pretty. Pretty. Acceptance through appearance, classic Alder language. Say hello, sweetheart, I nudged gently. Hi, Grandma, Lily whispered, shy but hopeful. My mother straightened. Come inside. It's freezing. The warmth of the living room hit me like a wall, pine candles, polished floors, a towering Christmas tree dripping with ornaments. Expensive ones, imported ones, ones they shouldn't afford. A muscle in my jaw twitched. Look who decided to come home, a voice drawled. Cole, my older brother. Still wearing that smug half-smile he perfected in high school designer coat, draped over one shoulder like a catalog model. You're late, he added, as if I'd inconvenienced royalty. Dad's not happy. I swallowed the old instinct to apologize. Vivian swept in next, all hair extensions and perfume. Grace, oh wow, Seattle hasn't changed you at all. A compliment disguised as a dagger. Hi, Vivian, I said. She pretended not to hear. Then he appeared. Harold Alder stepped into the entryway, posture, rigid eyes, sharp, the same towering presence that once determined the temperature of my entire childhood. He looked older, deeper lines, a slight stoop, but the authority in his gaze hadn't faded. He looked me up and down. He grunted. You look better than I expected. Not Merry Christmas. Not good to see you. Not even hello. Just judgment. Lily clutched me tighter. Mommy. It's okay, baby, I whispered. My father noticed her, then studying her like she was a stray puppy someone dumped on his porch. So that's the kid. Looks like you when you were small. Pity. My breath hitched. The old burn flared up, the familiar feeling of being slapped without being touched. I forced myself not to react. Not here. Not yet. In the dining room, the long Christmas table was already set. 12 seats, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles, and at the very end, 2 smaller, plainer chairs. For me and my daughter, I felt the insult from across the room. Cole motioned toward them with feigned innocence. We figured you'd be more comfortable down there, closer to the kids, Harold added. It's the proper place when you haven't contributed to the family I had quietly fed for 5 years. The family living in this renovated house because I'd kept their lights on, their mortgage afloat, their debts erased. My silence was the only thing that protected them from their own shame. Lily tugged my sleeve. Mommy, why are we sitting so far? My throat tightened. It's okay, sweetheart. But it wasn't, and tomorrow on Christmas Eve it would all shatter. For now I inhaled deeply, forcing calm into my bones. I took Lily to the small chairs at the end of the table, my hands steady, even though my pulse thundered in my ears. This was the house I grew up in. This was the family that shaped the woman I became. This was the storm I stepped back into, for one reason only, for Lily to see that her mother never bowed again. The chandelier flickered above us, casting sharp angles of light across the table. A familiar, suffocating tension crept through the room. I felt 17 again, small and invisible, but I wasn't, not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The same subject line as earlier glowed through the fabric, transfer pending. My heart thudded once. They had no idea what was coming. And for the first time since stepping off that plane, a slow, steady warmth flickered inside me, not fear, not doubt, power. Quiet, patient waiting. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The smell of pine cleaner hit me the moment I stepped deeper into the hallway, and with it came a memory I never asked for. It crawled out of some locked drawer in my mind, so sharp, so vivid, it nearly stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't heard the word worthless in years, but walking through that house, I could feel it echoing under the floorboards, seeping out of the walls, whispering from the shadows where I once hid my tears. I didn't hear it first at 35 or 25 or even 16. I heard it when I was 6. And now, as Lily twirled happily near the Christmas tree, I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders again like an old familiar frost. I stood there smiling for her sake, while my childhood replayed behind my eyelids like a home movie with bad lighting and worse sound, a movie no one should have starred in. It began in the old alder kitchen with its scuffed linoleum and humming fridge. I was 8 years old, tiptoeing on a stool to reach the cabinet above the stove. Marjorie, my mother, liked the cabinet spotless, and I was determined to scrub away the faint handprint I'd left earlier that morning. I wanted her to smile at me the way she smiled at Cole and Vivian. But she didn't smile. She never smiled at me. She walked in, saw me reaching, saw the sponge in my tiny hand, and said in her cool, tired voice, "Grace, stop fussing. You don't need to try so hard. Let your brother and sister shine." I froze. Even then I knew what she meant. Vivian shined with beauty. Cole shined with charm. And me, I was the dull one, the quiet one, the one they didn't quite know what to do with, the one who didn't fit. The memory flickered, and suddenly I was back in the living room, heart thudding, hearing my family's current laughter from the kitchen sink. Lily's small voice broke through the spinning reel in my head. "Mommy, look, I found an angel ornament." She held up a porcelain angel, wings chipped but delicate. My throat tightened. I remembered that ornament. It was the one I'd won during a school raffle. I brought it home when I was 9, proud, excited, hoping it would go on the tree. My mother put it at the back of a branch, hidden completely. When I asked why, she said, "It doesn't match the theme, sweetheart." And I learned early, nothing about me matched their theme. I stroked Lily's curls and told her, "It's beautiful," and meant it. She set it gently near the top, exactly where I'd once imagined mine would go. My chest ached, and the memories rolled on. I was 10 during another winter like this, carrying a grocery bag twice my weight down the snowy path from town because Harold didn't want to waste gas picking me up. Halfway home, I slipped. The vegetables rolled everywhere, disappearing under piles of snow. I scrambled to gather them, fingers numb, breath shaky. By the time I made it inside, Harold was pacing in the kitchen, red-faced from bourbon. "You worthless little thing," he snapped. "Can't do a single task right." The words landed so hard I thought they cracked something invisible inside me. That same night, as I lay awake listening to the radiator hiss, I heard my mother whisper to the neighbor at the front door, "Grace just isn't like the other two. She's quiet, not special." Not special. Those words, more than any slap, any shout, built walls inside me that took years to crawl over. And now, decades later, walking through the same hallways, the same air thick with judgment, I could feel little Grace tugging at my sleeve again. "Don't mess up," she whispered. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't shine too bright." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself, but the memories weren't done with me yet. I saw myself at 11 practicing piano on the old upright in the den, keys sticking, pedal squeaking. Music was the only place I felt powerful, even if I played quietly, so Cole wouldn't shout at me to stop. I taught myself scales, arpeggios, simple pieces I found in a discarded book from the library. My first recital was at the Maple Valley Community Hall. My mother had promised to attend. Cole had a football game. Vivian had a dress fitting, but Harold had said he would try. No one came. Not a single alder sat in the front row. I played anyway. My teacher told me I was brave. But when I got home, Harold didn't ask how it went. He just muttered, "No one needs to watch you do something useless." That night I cried into my pillow, quiet enough so no one would hear, quiet enough to keep my shame contained. And somehow, even now, I felt that same loneliness humming under my skin. Mommy Lily tugged the hem of my sweater. "Why are you squeezing the ornament so hard?" I loosened my grip. "Just thinking, sweetheart." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. "Only children accept," and skipped off toward the fireplace. I breathed out slowly and followed her, but my mind was already drifting to another memory, one I rarely allowed myself to revisit. 17. Standing in the doorway of this very house. The same house, the same air, the same shadows. I had just told Harold and Marjorie I'd been accepted into the University of Washington's computer engineering program. A full scholarship. A chance at escape. Harold's response was a laugh short, sharp, cruel. You, he said, computer engineering con gai thi la lei chong, dung tuong bur. Then his voice rose, filling the room like smoke. You won't last 3 months. You'll come crawling back. That night I packed a single borrowed suitcase while Marjorie stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Don't make things worse, she warned. But I left anyway. I walked away, and I never came back. Not until now. Mommy. Did you have Christmas photos? Lily asked from under the tree, innocence sparkling in her eyes. My heart tightened. No, I said quietly. Not really. Why? She asked. Because I was the child they didn't want to remember. Because in every group picture I was told to stand in the back. Because I ruined the aesthetic. But Lily only blinked up at me, waiting for an answer she could hold without breaking. So I knelt and said, because no one took them. But we'll take lots of ours. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her ornaments. For a moment I let myself watch her. My proof that cycles could end, that wounds could scar over, without becoming walls, that softness could survive even the hardest winters. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A notification glowing through the fabric. Evergreen federal transfer pending. The number hidden behind that message could change everything. Would change everything. But not yet. Not until tomorrow. I slid the phone deeper into my pocket and forced my shoulders to relax, though every breath felt heavy, like the air itself carried years of ghosts. Grace, my mother called from the kitchen, her voice clipped. Come help with the table, the same command she'd given me countless times as a girl. I turned toward the doorway, Lily's laughter echoing behind me, and for the first time since arriving, a thought flickered, quiet but burning. I am not that child anymore. I am not invisible. I am not worthless. And tomorrow they will finally learn exactly who I became when no one believed in me and who I never needed them to be. The dining room looked almost identical to how I remembered it, except bigger, shinier, colder. The chandelier above the table glittered like a frozen waterfall, its light reflecting off polished silver and stemmed crystal. Everything in the room screamed wealth, status, perfection. Everything, except the way I felt standing there, a guest in the home I'd once scrubbed, polished, and tiptoed through. Lily clung to my sleeve as we approached the table, her eyes wide. Is this really where Grandpa lives? Yes, I whispered. This is it. She nodded, as if trying to memorize the room. I wished she wouldn't. My mother, Jacqueline, moved briskly between the chairs, adjusting napkins that were already perfectly folded. Grace, put her on the smaller chair, please, she said without looking at me. Children's fingers wander. I heard the old message threaded into her tone. Children like yours ruin things. I lifted Lily gently onto the chair, brushing a curl from her face. She smiled up at me, oblivious to the tension thickening the air like fog. My father, Gerald, strode into the room with a glass of bourbon and the confidence of a man convinced he owned the world. His gaze flicked over me briefly before shifting toward Lily, who stiffened slightly when his expression didn't soften. So he said, swirling his drink. You made it. I said I would. One syllable. Enough to reopen an old scar. Vivian entered next, her perfume arriving before she did. Her eyes swept over my dress, my shoes, my hair, cataloging every detail the way she always had. Nice outfit, she said. It's simple. Comfortable, I replied. She gave a soft laugh. Of course. Cole followed behind her, taller than I remembered, broader, wearing the kind of suit men wear when they need you to notice the label. He clapped a hand on my shoulder with exaggerated enthusiasm. Grace, wow. Look at you. I almost didn't recognize you. I smiled tightly. That tends to happen when people don't look. He chuckled as if I'd made a joke. Lily looked from face to face, unsure whether to smile or hide. The adults smiled back at her with polite stiffness, not warmth, not interest. Just the kind of distant politeness people use for someone else's child. My heart squeezed. Dinner began with the usual ritual, my father announcing the quality of the roast, Vivian commenting on calories she pretended not to count, Cole boasting about a new dealership contract, and my mother sighing dramatically about the stress of managing such a large home. Through it all, I remained quiet, answering only when spoken to, letting the murmurs of conversation wash uselessly over me. Then my father asked the question I'd been expecting since I stepped inside. "So, Grace," he said, spearing a piece of meat, "how exactly are you supporting yourself these days?" The table quieted slightly, forks pausing midair. I kept my voice calm. "I work in tech consulting." "Consulting," he repeated as though the word had a bad taste. "Meaning unemployed?" "No," I said. "Meaning consulting," he huffed. "People who can't get real jobs call themselves consultants." I felt Lily's tiny hand slip into mine under the table. I squeezed back. Vivian sipped her wine. "Is it true most people in tech get laid off? It must be stressful, trying to keep up." "It's competitive," I said, "but I'm doing fine." Cole leaned back, folding his arms. "Is that why you came alone last Christmas? Couldn't afford flights for two?" The question was casual, spoken lightly, but the intent was sharp. "Like always." Lily blinked up at me. "We didn't come last Christmas." "Exactly." Cole snapped his fingers. "Got busy with consulting." He smirked, and my mother cleared her throat sharply. "Let's try to be civil," she said, though her eyes flicked toward me with quiet disapproval. "It's Christmas." Gerald took another long drink. "Christmas," he muttered. "A time for family, even the ones who run away." The silence that followed was heavy. And then, as if on cue, the real strike came. So my father said, his voice louder now, "Are you teaching your daughter how to stretch $1? Or are you hoping someone else will pay her bills, too?" Lily stiffened beside me. "Mommy pays all our bills," she whispered fiercely. Gerald turned toward her with an arched eyebrow. "I'm sure she tries, Dad," I warned, but he wasn't done. "You always had your head in the clouds," he continued, "dreaming you'd amount to something. But I told you then, and I'll say it again, you can pretend you're something special, but you're not." I felt the room tilt, memories pushing hard against my ribs, but before I could respond, Lily spoke again, this time louder. "My mommy is special." The table froze. Gerald stared at her, as if she'd spoken out of turn in a courtroom. "And you," he said, pointing his fork at her, "should learn when adults are speaking." That did it. The breath in my lungs turned sharp, my pulse quickening, my hands cold. I leaned forward, voice low. "You don't speak to her like that," he scoffed. "You're sensitive. Always have been." "Protective," I corrected. "Overreacting," he shot back. Vivian hid a smirk behind her napkin. Cole nudged his wineglass with a finger, amused. Lily's fingers trembled in mine. And suddenly a memory slammed into me like a door thrown open by the wind. 16. Christmas Eve. I had spilled cranberry punch on the tablecloth, the old one, embroidered, imported, expensive. Gerald had shouted so loudly the neighbors heard. My mother had apologized on my behalf. Cole and Vivian laughed. "Worthless girl, stupid girl, clumsy girl." Now he looked at Lily as if ready to recycle the same insults. I felt something inside me snap. "You're not going to speak to my daughter like you spoke to me," I said steadily. He leaned back, amused. "Oh, and what are you going to do? Run away again?" "No," I whispered. "I'm going to stop letting you decide who I am." A beat of silence cracked through the room. Then Gerald laughed, a deep, mocking laugh that spilled across the table like spilled oil. "You," he roared. "You worthless poor thing." The words hit like a slap. Lily gasped. Vivian's lips curled into a tight, satisfied smirk. Cole snorted. My mother looked away. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not pain, not shame, but the surge of something long buried. Strength. Before I could speak, something unexpected happened. The lights flickered. My phone buzzed against the table. At first I ignored it, but then I saw the caller ID. Evergreen Federal Bank. The same number from earlier. My stomach tightened. The room quieted as the vibration continued, long and insistent. My father scoffed, seriously at the table. "Who's calling you bill collectors?" Cole laughed. Vivian rolled her eyes. I reached for the phone. My heart hammered once, twice. I pressed accept. Miss Alden came a calm voice on the line. "I'm calling to confirm your updated account balance. Congratulations, the final transfer cleared this evening." The room had gone completely silent. My father, still mid-smirk, froze. I swallowed. "My updated balance." "Yes, ma'am," the officer continued cheerfully. "Your account now reflects a total of $960 million. My breath caught. The fork dropped from my mother's hand. A glass slipped from Cole's fingers. Vivian's face went blank, blank with shock, blank with envy, blank with a sudden recalibration of the family hierarchy. I could feel every heartbeat in the room. Even the air seemed to pause. I didn't speak, didn't move, didn't look at anyone. I just whispered, "Thank you," and ended the call. Then I set the phone down on the table, the screen still glowing with the bank logo. Lily looked up at me, confused. My father stared at the phone, his face draining of color. Vivian swallowed hard. Cole blinked. My mother let out a tiny, strangled sound. And for the first time in my life, the silence in that room belonged to me. Gerald was the first to speak, though the words came out thin, strangled, almost swallowed. What did he say?" The chandelier hummed softly above us, its light trembling the way my hands once did in this house. But now I felt nothing tremble in me, not anymore. "I think you heard him," I said quietly. Vivian leaned forward as if pulled by a string, her eyes scanning my face, then the phone on the table, then my face again. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Cole recovered next, though his voice cracked. 960,000. His question held hope. Hope that he had misheard, hope that the number was small enough to mock. "Million," I said. The word hung in the air like smoke. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. Her ring clinked softly against her necklace. "Grace, what kind of joke is this?" "It's not a joke." Gerald slammed his palm against the table, though the gesture lacked the force it once did. "You expect us to believe you have nearly $1 billion. I'm not asking you to believe anything," I replied. "You asked what I do. That was your answer." The room fell still again. Lily looked up at me, still confused, still scared from the shouting earlier. I stroked her hair gently as Gerald stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Or worse, a truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Cole suddenly stood from his chair, pacing behind Vivian. "Okay. But how you don't have a real job? You never have. You can't just." "I can," I said, keeping my voice calm. "And I did." Vivian blinked rapidly. 960 million, Grace, that's... She swallowed. "That's impossible." "It's a contract payout," I said simply. Gerald's head jerked up. "Contract with who?" "Northbridge Systems," I answered. Silence again. Vivian's eyebrows pinched. "Is that a company?" "Yes," I said. "Mine." My mother looked as though someone had struck her. "Yours, I'm the founder." Cole barked out a disbelieving laugh, though it sounded more like a cough. "You founder of a company worth what, $1 billion more," I said. "At least on paper." He stopped laughing. Vivian covered her mouth with her hand. "I thought you were living paycheck to paycheck." "You thought wrong." Gerald rose slowly from his seat, as if pulled by puppet strings, his eyes sharp and narrowed, searching for flaws, loopholes, lies he could expose. "You're lying." I met his gaze. "I'm not." He stared at me long and hard, but I didn't flinch. "Not this time. Not ever again." Then his voice shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A tone I had never once heard directed at me. Softened. Calculating. Almost respectful. "Grace, sweetheart, sit down. Let's discuss this properly." The words landed like cold water. "Sweetheart, discuss." He thought he could pivot, rewrite the script, pull me back into orbit with a handful of softened syllables. I shook my head. "No, Dad. I think I've heard everything I need to. I didn't mean what I said earlier, he insisted quickly. I was just upset. Holiday stress. You know how families are. No, I said gently. I know how our family is. My mother wrung her hands in her lap. Well, maybe it's time to start fresh, darling. This is wonderful news. We should celebrate. This is a blessing for all of us. For all of us, I repeated. Her smile faltered. Vivian jumped in next, her tone too sweet to be sincere. You should have told us you were doing so well. We had no idea, Grace. Really. You never asked. Cole stepped closer. Hey, look, sis. If you ever need help managing that kind of money, I don't. He blinked. Gerald cleared his throat, the last shreds of pride clinging to his voice. We're family. Family shares things. Lily stiffened beside me. I felt her breath catch her small hand tightening around mine. I leaned toward her, murmuring softly, It's okay, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. She nodded, but her eyes were watery. I stood up. Jacqueline rose immediately, reaching for my arm. Grace, please. It's Christmas. I know, I said. And that's why I'm choosing peace for me and my daughter. Vivian spoke carefully, as though crafting her words midair. You're really leaving? Just like that? Yes, Cole scoffed. Don't be dramatic. I'm not, I said calmly. I'm just done. My father tried one last time. You walk out that door, you'll regret it. Don't make the same childish mistakes you made when you left home. I don't regret leaving, I cut in. I regret coming back. The room stilled. I turned to Lily. Get your coat, honey. She scrambled from her chair, eager to escape the tension pressing down on her small shoulders. As she put on her boots, Vivian murmured something to Cole too low for me to catch. My mother reached out again, but I stepped back. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just finished. Jacqueline's voice trembled. What about Lily? She should know her family. She does, I replied. And I'm protecting her from them. I opened the door, cold winter air sweeping in. The scent of pine and snow filled the hallway, washing away the heaviness clinging to the dining room. Behind me, I heard my father call out, If you leave now, don't expect us to come crawling back when you need help. I paused just long enough to answer. I don't need help, I said. I never did. The wind howled through the open doorway like applause. We stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath our boots, the darkness of the yard strangely comforting. Lily slipped her hand into mine, her voice soft. Mommy, did I do something wrong? I knelt in front of her, brushing snow from her hood. No, baby. You were perfect. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind. Her eyes filled with tears. But Grandpa yelled at me. I pulled her into my arms. And that's exactly why we're leaving. You deserve to be treated with love. Nothing less. She sniffled, nodding against my shoulder. We walked down the driveway, the lights from the house glowing warmly behind us, a warmth that never belonged to us. At the car, Lily climbed into her seat, still quiet, still processing. As I buckled her in, she touched my hand. Mommy, she whispered, I'm glad we left. My chest tightened. Me too, sweetheart. When I slid into the driver's seat, the house stood in the rearview mirror like a painting, a beautiful illusion that hid a truth I no longer wished to live inside. I started the engine. Snowflakes drifted across the windshield, catching in the glow of the headlights like tiny sparks. As we pulled away, I let the silence settle between us, not heavy this time, but freeing. For the first time since arriving, I breathed easily. Behind us, the Alden house grew smaller, its perfect windows flickering with golden light, but none of it reached me anymore. Because the truth was simple, I had walked into that house invisible, but I was leaving untouchable. Snow was still falling when I carried Lily into the hotel lobby. The warm air hit our faces like a soft blanket, and for the first time that night, she loosened her grip on my coat. The receptionist greeted us with holiday cheer, completely unaware of the storm we'd just escaped. I checked us in with a smile that felt thin but steady. Once inside the room, Lily curled up on the bed with her stuffed fox rubbing her eyes. Mommy, Can we stay here forever? She whispered. I brushed a curl from her forehead. Not forever. Just until we figure out somewhere better. She nodded, already drifting off. Within minutes, the soft rise and fall of her breath filled the room. I sat down at the small desk next to the window. Outside, the lights of Maple Valley shimmered faintly beneath the snowfall, a town wrapped in Christmas magic that had never belonged to me. I opened my laptop, feeling the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I opened the banking portal. And there it was, my truth reflected back at me in cold, unflinching numbers. $960,000,000. The result of years of work nights without sleep, sacrifices. No one saw choices. No one understood. Money that represented survival, resilience, a life built out of nothing but grit and code and sheer stubbornness. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I scrolled down to the automated recurring transfers. There were 4 of them. 1 to my mother, 1 to Nathan, 1 to Vivian, 1 to the so-called Alden Family Trust, a fund I had quietly supported after my father's retirement. Every payment had been set up years ago, long before Northbridge was valued in the hundreds of millions, back when my family's safety still mattered to me more than my own peace. I clicked the first transfer. A confirmation box appeared. Cancel scheduled payment. My hand didn't shake, not even a little. Yes, a soft chime. Then I canceled Vivian's, another chime. Then Nathan's, a heavier breath. And finally, the family trust. When the last cancellation confirmation appeared, something inside me loosened like a knot finally untying in my chest after years of being pulled tight. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, letting the silence wash over me. It wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was freedom. The next morning, sunlight filtered faintly through the curtains. I woke to the feeling of Lily crawling into my lap, warm and sleepy. "Mommy," she murmured. "Can we go home now?" "Yes," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're going home." She smiled, and for the first time since arriving in Vermont, she didn't look scared. As we packed our bags, I received the first message. From my mother. It read, "Call me. Urgent." I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another message. Then another. Then one from Vivian. Then a string from Cole. Then a missed call from my father. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and asked Lily if she wanted waffles. We left before the housekeeping staff arrived, our footprints the only marks we left behind. By the time we reached the airport, my phone had filled with more messages. "Where are you? Your father is upset. This isn't funny, Grace. Call us back right now, we need to talk." "What did you do, Dad?" says the trust account is showing 0. 0. For the first time in years, that number made me smile. On the plane, Lily fell asleep with her head in my lap before takeoff. I brushed her hair back, gently remembering how small she had looked when Gerald yelled at her. How fast she had shrunk into herself, as if she already knew the weight of being someone's disappointment. Never again. The flight was smooth, and the Seattle skyline felt like a real homecoming. The air was cool and damp when we stepped outside, carrying the familiar scent of the Sound. Comforting. Honest. Safe. As the rideshare car pulled away from the airport, I checked my messages again. 37 missed calls. A flurry of texts. All angry now. How could you do this? We depended on that trust. Dad is furious. Fix this before it ruins everything. This is our family money, not yours. Family money. I felt something close to laughter rise in my chest. None of them had asked where the money came from. None of them ever had. They just assumed. Just like they assumed I was invisible, disposable, unimportant. I silenced the phone. When we reached our condo, the hallway smelled like eucalyptus from the diffuser our neighbor always left running. Lily darted inside, kicking off her boots with relief. She grabbed her fox and ran to the window. "Mommy." The lights are still up. I joined her at the glass. Our small balcony tree twinkled with white lights, just as we'd left it. The city below shimmered with holiday color. The world felt brighter here. We spent the evening in pajamas eating leftover peppermint brownies and watching animated movies. Every so often my phone buzzed angrily from across the room, but I didn't move to check it. By the time I tucked Lily into her own bed, her eyes were clear again. No lingering confusion, no fear. She curled into her blankets and whispered, "I like our house better." "So do I said. When she drifted off, I stepped onto the balcony. The city was wrapped in a soft mist, the lights glowing through it like Christmas lanterns. I wrapped my sweater tighter around me and breathed in deeply. Then I picked up my phone and finally opened the latest message. "We need to talk about what you owe us." I read it twice. What I owe them. I had given them everything silently, invisibly, willingly, because some part of me had always believed that love was a debt to be earned. But I didn't believe that anymore. Instead of replying, I blocked the group thread entirely. One tap. Gone. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The condo was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. I opened my laptop and pulled up my legal documents, company papers, personal finances, estate planning. I called Marshall, my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "Grace, everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I just need to confirm something. All those transfers I've been making, I had no legal obligation to continue them, correct?" "None," he said. "They were voluntary. Gifts. Then everything is clean completely. You don't owe them a cent." I closed my eyes, letting that truth settle somewhere deep. "Thank you, Marshall. Anytime. And Grace? Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas." Later that afternoon, Lily and I walked to the corner cafe. The staff knew her name. They knew her favorite muffin. They saved her little holiday stickers behind the register. When we walked in, the barista smiled. "Back from your trip back," I said. "Good," she replied warmly. "Feels like Christmas now." Something in my chest softened, warmed. This was home. As we walked back to our building, Lily reached for my hand and said, "Mommy, did Grandpa want us to go?" The question hit me gently like a cold wind. "No," I said softly. "Grandpa wanted to feel bigger than me, and I wouldn't let him." She nodded, quiet but thoughtful. Then she said, "I'm glad we're here. So am I, baby." When we got home, the condo felt alive, full of light, full of the future, full of peace that didn't depend on anyone's approval. I wrapped Lily in a blanket and held her close on the couch as we watched the snow fall outside. For the first time in years, the past felt far away, and the future felt like mine. Lily was still asleep when I slipped out of bed the next morning. The Seattle winter light crept in through the blinds, pale silver soft. It cast long stripes across the hardwood floors, making the apartment feel warmer than it was. I stood for a moment in that quiet, letting myself breathe before the day began. For the first time since Vermont, my chest didn't feel tight. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen island. Emails flooded the screen. Investor updates, contract confirmations, a few questions from the engineering team. I answered them calmly, steadily, falling back into the rhythm of my life, the one I had built with my own hands. But my peace lasted only 15 minutes before my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it ring. It buzzed a second time, then a third. Persistent. Finally, a voicemail came through. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. "Grace, it's Mom. Please call me back. There's been a misunderstanding. Your father, he's upset and we need to talk. This isn't something you can ignore forever. Family shouldn't abandon family." I set the phone down carefully as though it might explode. My mother's voice had always carried a ribbon of guilt sharp enough to cut through any boundary I tried to build. But I felt nothing now. No panic, no dread, just distance. When Lily padded into the room a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes, I closed the laptop and lifted her onto my lap. "Good morning, baby." "Good morning," she murmured, resting her head on my chest. "Do we have school today?" "No school today," I said. "Just us." She smiled. That alone made everything worth it. After breakfast, we walked together to the park near Pike Place. The playground was nearly empty, just a few bundled-up kids and parents sipping coffee from paper cups. While Lily climbed the slide ladder, I scrolled through my emails again, carefully avoiding the notification bubble on my voicemail. A message popped up from Zoe, my assistant, heard from the bank. Your contract with the defense client cleared perfectly. Congrats, boss. Also, your family left 3 voicemails on the company line. Want me to block them? I typed back. Yes, block them all. Zoe replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a line of confetti. I laughed softly. Lily waved to me from the top of the slide. Watch, Mommy. I'm watching. She slid down with a squeal, landing in a puff of frost. Her delight washed away whatever tension still lingered under my ribs. Back home, I made hot cocoa while she colored on the living room rug. When the doorbell rang, I stiffened. The security monitor lit up automatically, and I exhaled when I saw who it was. Lena. She stood outside holding 2 bags of groceries, a look of fierce determination etched across her face. I opened the door. You didn't tell me, she said, pushing past me into the apartment. I had to find out you survived a Christmas ambush from a mutual friend on Instagram who saw your mother posting about family tragedy. I blinked. Family tragedy, she huffed. You know how your mom is. Vague posts, dramatic captions, zero details. People think your father had a stroke or Nathan crashed a car. I sighed. Of course she'd make it about her. Lena set the grocery bags on the counter and gave me the look, the one that meant she wasn't leaving until she knew everything. We'd been roommates at Stanford, and she was the only person who had seen the inside of my early chaos. The ramen dinners, the late-night coding sessions, the breakdowns on the bathroom floor with my laptop still open. So I told her everything. Every word from Gerald's mouth, every insult, every frozen expression around the table. I told her about the bank call, the $960 million spoken into the air like an incantation that broke something open. Halfway through my recounting, she interrupted. He yelled at Lily, yes. Lena's eyes sharpened. Then he deserves nothing from you. Nothing. I know. She pointed a finger at me. Good. Because I swear, Grace, if you tell me you're even thinking about sending them money again, I'm not. She exhaled with relief and collapsed onto the couch. Good Lord, I was prepared to tackle you. I laughed and sat beside her. I'm learning. You're evolving, she corrected. Lily ran into the room, then showing off a drawing of us holding hands in the snow. Look, Mommy, Auntie. Lena's expression softened immediately. Baby, it's beautiful. We taped it to the fridge. Later after lunch, I opened my work emails again. Scrolling through, I noticed a message from an unfamiliar sender with a familiar last name. Subject: we need to discuss the trust. Cole. My stomach tightened, but not from fear. It tightened from memory, the way he'd looked at me at dinner, smug, dismissive, certain of his place in the world. A place he believed I could never reach. I opened the message. You didn't just hurt Dad. You hurt all of us. That trust mattered. We depended on it. You owe it to the family to restore it. Owe it. That word again. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed something else. Deleted it again. Finally, I shut the laptop without answering. Some people deserved silence more than explanations. That evening, after Lily went to bed, I stepped onto the balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The city lights shimmered below like a constellation made of street lamps and fairy beacons. My phone buzzed once, another voicemail from my mother, but I didn't check it. Instead, I opened the secure portal for my financial accounts and reviewed everything again. I didn't just want freedom from them. I wanted to secure freedom for the rest of my life, for me and for Lily. Estate plans, trusts, legal protections, charitable structures for the STEM program I wanted to build. I worked through the documents slowly, deliberately, each click anchoring me more firmly into a life I controlled. Around midnight, I received an email from someone unexpected. Christopher Bennett. Hope you made it back safely. I know family holidays can be rough. If you ever need a break, let me buy you coffee. No business talk unless you want it. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Christopher was steady, kind, brilliant. A man whose presence didn't drain me. Someone who saw people for who they were, not who he needed them to be. But this wasn't the time. Or maybe it was. I didn't answer. Not yet. I stepped back inside and checked on Lily. She had sprawled across the bed diagonally, hugging her fox under the blankets. I straightened the covers around her and kissed her cheek. "Good night, baby," I whispered. Her small voice murmured back in sleep, "Night, mommy." When I lay in my own bed, exhaustion wrapped around me like another blanket. But for the first time in years, exhaustion didn't feel like defeat. It felt like rebuilding. And as I drifted off, one truth settled deep in my bones, solid and unshakable. Walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the first chapter of the life I chose, not the life they assigned me. Lily was humming softly at the kitchen table when I opened my eyes the next morning. The sun had barely risen, but she was already coloring a page filled with stars and gingerbread houses. For a moment, I simply watched her, the quiet rhythm of her small world grounding me more than any meditation ever could. "Mommy," she said when she noticed me, "I made this one for you." She held up the picture proudly. My name was written across the top in wobbly letters, each one drawn in a different color. I walked over and kissed the top of her head. "It's beautiful," I said, "just like you." She giggled, then leaned against me as I made breakfast pancakes, because she asked for them in a whisper that made it impossible to say no. For 20 minutes, the world felt simple again. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to check it. I wanted pancakes and calm and Lily's laughter, but the buzzing persisted like a mosquito I couldn't ignore. I picked it up reluctantly, glanced at the screen, and froze. Nathan, 3 missed calls, 2 new messages. The same man who had smirked at me across the dinner table as my father humiliated me. The same man who had laughed when Lily spilled a glass of water. The same man whose life had been quietly underwritten by my money for half a decade. I opened the first message. "You've ruined everything. Dad can't get his prescriptions refilled. My business loans are collapsing. Fix this now." The second message followed immediately. "If you don't restore the trust, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." I set the phone down and inhaled slowly. The audacity was breathtaking. Lily reached for a pancake with both hands. "Mommy, look," I made a smiley face with berries. I forced my voice to stay soft. "I see that, baby. It's perfect." She didn't need to see anything else. After breakfast, I walked her to school with a steady stride that didn't reflect the storm inside my chest. Once she ran off to join her friends, their backpacks bouncing behind them like tiny wings. I stood at the curb and allowed myself a long exhale. The cold air stung my lungs sharp and invigorating the way truth often feels. When I returned home, the apartment felt different. Still warm. Still ours, but suddenly too quiet. I set my keys down, sat at the kitchen bar, and replayed the message in my mind. Legal action. They genuinely believed they had a claim on my life. They genuinely believed my success was theirs. I opened my laptop and sent a quick message to Marshall. "My brother is threatening legal action. Call me when you can." He responded within 10 minutes. "On my way to the office. I can talk in 20. I nodded to myself and made tea while I waited. When the phone rang, I answered on the first buzz. "What exactly did he say?" Marshall asked. I read the messages aloud. He sighed heavily. "They have absolutely no claim," he said. "Not even a sliver. Every transfer you made was voluntary. There's no contract, no agreement, no documentation tying you to their financial obligations." "I figured," I said. But he continued, "You should expect escalation. People who lose unearned privilege tend to panic." "That's one word for it," he chuckled. "Grace, you're safe. Completely. I'll have my paralegal draft a formal notice reminding them they have no grounds." "Thank you." "And, Grace, yes, I know this is messy. I know they're family. But you're doing the right thing. I closed my eyes for a moment. I know. After the call, I opened my inbox. Dozens of new messages, holiday sales project, updates, a memo from my head of engineering, a Christmas card from a client. Then, one subject line caught my eye. Coffee still stands, Christopher. My throat tightened slightly, but in a different way. A gentler way. His message was short. If you're free this week, I'd love to catch up. I promise not to bring any contracts. A small smile tugged at my lips. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed again, this time with a video call from Zoe. I answered. Her eyes widened the second she saw me. Okay, spill. Why does your face look like you've seen a ghost or a donut you're not allowed to eat? I raised an eyebrow. What kind of comparison is that? A true one, she said. What happened, Nathan? I said, simply. She groaned. Sent him coal. Actually, no, coal is a luxury now. I laughed in spite of myself. He wants me to restore the trust. Let me guess, threatened you, basically. She shook her head. I swear your family is allergic to accountability. Should I dig up some inspirational quotes to send him anonymously? Maybe something about earning your own life. No, I said gently. Just block the number from the company line. Gladly. After we hung up, I felt lighter. Still tense, still wounded, but lighter. I spent the next few hours working real work, meaningful work. Reviewing our cybersecurity audit, finalizing architecture for the new threat detection model, approving a technical grant for a single mom in Ohio who wanted to study Python. This was who I was, not the girl my father had tried to shrink, not the sister my siblings tried to mock, not the scapegoat of a dysfunctional household. Here in the glow of my monitor, surrounded by code and vision and purpose, I was the woman I had chosen to become. Around noon, I took a break and answered Christopher. Coffee sounds good. Tomorrow. His reply came within minutes. Name the time and place. I suggested a quiet cafe near the waterfront. Neutral ground. Warm light. No triggers. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang again. I checked the monitor. A courier. He held a small envelope. I signed for it but didn't open it until I was back inside. When I slid the letter out, the handwriting made my breath catch. My mother. It read, Your father is devastated. We all are. Everything is collapsing. You have no idea how much pressure this puts on us. This isn't the daughter I raised. Please fix this before things get worse. There it was. Not one apology. Not one question about Lily. Not one acknowledgement of harm. Just expectation, just entitlement, just the belief that I was a resource created to maintain their comfort. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the recycling bin. Then I whispered to the empty room, I'm not yours anymore. After picking up Lily from school, we baked cookies together. She smeared frosting on her nose and I pretended not to notice so she could giggle when I discovered it. We ate 3 cookies each, then walked to the pier to watch the ferries glide across the water. She held my hand the whole time. Mommy, she said softly, do you think Grandpa still hates us? I knelt beside her. No, baby. He doesn't hate you. He just doesn't know how to be kind. She considered this and nodded. I like kind people better. Me too. When I tucked her into bed that night, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, I'm glad it's just us. So am I whispered back. After she slept, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights flickering across the water. Each glowing window represented a life, a story, a moment unfolding. For the first time, mine felt like it was beginning again. And whatever storm my family was facing on the other side of the country, it wasn't mine to weather anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their scapegoat. I wasn't their invisible daughter. I was free. Really, finally free. Lily woke up early the next morning, bouncing onto my bed with the kind of energy only children possess. Mommy, wake up. It's sunny. I opened one eye and smiled. Is it really? She nodded so hard her curls shook. Can we do something fun today? Something fun, I repeated, stretching. I think we can manage that. She squealed and ran off, leaving me laughing softly as I pulled myself from the warmth of the blankets. The world outside our window glowed with winter brightness, crisp, calm, clean. Seattle sunlight was rare in December, but when it appeared, it made everything shimmer. I brewed coffee, letting the scent fill the room, and checked the time. My meeting with Christopher wasn't for a few more hours, just enough time for a slow morning and some much-needed clarity. Lily colored at the kitchen table while I answered a few light emails. Nothing urgent, nothing heavy, just enough to keep the world steady. When the clock struck 10, I changed into a soft gray sweater and jeans. Comfortable. Neutral. Not armor, just clothing. Lily watched me from the couch. "Are you going somewhere, Mommy?" I knelt beside her. "Just for a little bit. Auntie Rachel is coming to play with you." She considered this carefully. "Will she bring glitter pens?" "I think she might." A grin spread across her face. "Okay, have fun." Her innocence made everything easier. When Rachel arrived 20 minutes later with a bag full of crafts and snacks, Lily practically dragged her to the kitchen. I slipped out quietly, grateful for the distraction. The cold air outside woke me fully as I walked toward the waterfront cafe. My breath puffed in small clouds. The city moved around me, bus engines, distant ferry horns, the shuffle of downtown morning foot traffic. For years, this soundscape had been my freedom. Today, it steadied me as I approached the cafe. Christopher was already there. He stood by the window, hands wrapped around a mug, steam rising gently between his fingers. When he saw me, he smiled, warm, genuine, unhurried. The kind of smile that didn't expect anything from me. "Grace," he said, pulling out a chair. "You look lighter today." "I feel lighter," I admitted, sitting down. "More than I thought I would." He studied me for a moment, not intrusively, just curiously. "Rough holiday, that's one word for it. Want to talk about it?" I hesitated, then nodded. Because for once someone was asking without judgment. I told him not every detail, not the deepest wounds, but enough. The humiliation at the table, my father's rage, the insults, the silence that followed, the sudden bank call that cracked the entire room open. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, he just listened. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "That's a lot." "It was, and you still walked out." "I had to." "Good," he said softly. "That's strength, Grace, even if it felt like survival." His words settled over me like a warm coat. We talked for nearly an hour. About work. About Lily. About life after leaving painful places behind. He mentioned his own mother, how she'd raised him alone, how she'd built a small business from nothing, how he admired her more than anyone else on earth. "Women who rebuild themselves," he said, stirring his coffee, "are some of the strongest people I know." "Is that what I'm doing?" I asked quietly. "It's what you've already done." Something inside my chest loosened. He checked his watch. "I don't want to keep you too long. But would you like to do this again sometime?" His tone was careful, respectful. No pressure. I thought of my life before. The exhaustion, the betrayal, the years when love felt like a trap instead of a shelter. And then I thought of Lily's laughter, the sunlight, the new quiet in my bones. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that." His smile deepened. "Good." We walked outside together. The wind was cold, but the sun cut through it, making everything sparkle. At the corner, we paused. "Take care of yourself, Grace," he said. "You too." I watched him walk away, feeling something shift, something gentle and new. On the drive home, I didn't turn on music. I didn't distract myself from my thoughts. I simply let the morning settle into me, letting it soften everything the past week had hardened. When I walked through the door, Lily greeted me with glitter-smeared fingers and a huge hug. "Mommy, we made snowflakes." Hundreds of paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling on strings of tape. Rachel shrugged sheepishly. "She got ambitious," she said. "I love it," I laughed. After Rachel left, Lily and I spent the afternoon baking cookies and dancing around the kitchen to holiday music. Each small moment felt like a blessing. Every giggle felt like a reminder of what mattered. By evening, I checked my phone again. 10 missed calls from my mother. 3 from Nathan. 2 from my father. I blocked all 3 numbers one by one. Then I put the phone away. Later, after a warm bath, Lily fell asleep on the couch watching a cartoon. I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Then I stepped onto the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders. The city lights shimmered across the Sound like stars reflected on water. I breathed in the salt-scented night air, letting it fill every corner of me. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, in a very long time, I realized I didn't want anyone else's version of happiness. I wanted this, the quiet strength of choosing myself. As I stood there, my phone buzzed once more. A new email. From a bank executive. Your valuation is expected to surpass $1 billion within the next quarter. Congratulations on the milestone. $1 billion. I closed the email. Not because I didn't care, but because tonight it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the peace humming through the air, the promise of tomorrow, and the small, safe home where my daughter slept without fear. I whispered into the night, not to anyone in particular, but to the world that had finally opened its hands to me. We're okay. We're really okay. Lily was twirling around the living room with a tinsel garland when I woke up the next morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the apartment was already glowing with her excitement. For a moment I just watched her curls bouncing, her laugh light and unburdened. It struck me how different her childhood already was from mine, how different it would continue to be. "Mommy," she called out when she saw me. I made the apartment sparkly. "It looks beautiful," I said, ruffling her hair, "just like you." She beamed, then dashed off to decorate her stuffed fox with a bow. I made coffee, slowly savoring the warmth in my hands. Today was supposed to be quiet, a work-from-home day, a peaceful day. But peace rarely lasted long this time of year. The holidays had a way of cracking open old wounds. I logged into my laptop and skimmed through updates from my engineering team. Northbridge was expanding so quickly that sometimes I struggled to keep up with my own creation. A new contract proposal from a major hospital system. A beta test report from our London office. Zoe's memo about 2 interns who needed clearance. Progress. Forward motion. My real world. Then an email notification appeared on the sidebar. Subject: urgent, contact us immediately. My stomach tightened. It wasn't from my family. It was from my mother's church. The message read, "Your parents are experiencing significant financial strain. If there is any way you can support them this season, it would be a blessing. We know family disagreements can cause distance, but this is a time for unity." I closed the email immediately. They were using their church now. Of course they were. The kettle clicked off behind me. I stood completely still, letting the steam fog my glasses, grounding myself in the present moment before it could slip away. Lily wandered over. "Mommy, why do you look squishy?" I blinked. "Squishy?" She nodded. "Like when I think too hard and my brain feels squishy." I laughed in spite of myself. "Just thinking, sweetheart." She climbed onto my lap. "Don't think too much. It makes your eyebrows go down." I kissed the top of her head. "I'll remember that." After dropping her off at school, I walked to the waterfront for some air. Seattle mornings had a way of waking the heart up. Cold wind off the water, seagulls circling overhead, the rhythmic clank of the ferries docking. I wrapped my scarf tighter as I walked. My phone buzzed. For a second, I considered ignoring it. But it wasn't a family number. It was Christopher. "Are you free for lunch? I have something I want to run by you." A warmth spread through my chest, subtle but undeniable. I typed back, "Yes." We met at a small restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a florist shop. The windows were fogged from the cold, and soft jazz played under the murmur of conversation. When I arrived, Christopher was already seated, 2 mugs of tea on the table. You look more rested, he said. I feel more rested, I admitted. He studied me for a moment. Your family's still reaching out. Yes, I said. Just not directly anymore. They've started bringing in reinforcements. He grimaced. I'm sorry. It's fine, I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. They can push as hard as they want. I'm not going back. Good, he said softly. Because you deserve better. There was something in his voice, something steady, certain, that made my breath hitch slightly. We ordered food and talked easily about his latest project, Lily's newfound obsession with baking the Aurora Foundation's recent grant applications. He showed genuine interest, not performative politeness. It felt good. Halfway through lunch, Christopher's expression shifted more serious. Grace, he said carefully, have you considered putting legal distance between you and your family, like a restraining order or a notice asking them to stop contacting you? I exhaled slowly. I've thought about it. They're not going to stop, he said gently. Not when money's involved. I looked down at my hands. Steady. Strong. Steadier than they'd ever been. I know, I said, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. His gaze softened. You're more resilient than anyone I've ever met. Something warm flickered between us. Something quiet but undeniable. After lunch, he walked me out into the cold air. When he reached for my hand, his touch was gentle enough that I could have pulled away if I wanted to. I didn't. Take care of yourself, he murmured. I will. He smiled. And if you need anything, you call me. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. I will. We parted at the corner, and I watched him walk away, realizing how long it had been since I had let someone care about me without fear. When I returned home, I found a small envelope waiting by my door. No name on the outside. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in my father's handwriting, shaky, uneven. Your mother is sick. We need help. You can't ignore this. You have more money than you know what to do with. Don't punish us like this. You owe us more than silence. My fingers went cold, not because I believed him, but because of how easily he weaponized guilt, how quickly he turned everything into blame, how little he understood about me. Lily burst through the door a moment later, escorted by her after-school teacher. Mommy, I made you something, she said, holding up a glitter-covered ornament. I knelt and scooped her into my arms, pressing a kiss into her hair. Wow, I whispered. It's perfect. As she told me all about her day, I folded the letter quietly and slipped it into a drawer filled with every other guilt-soaked message my family had ever sent. I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to pick up the phone. I wasn't going to return to the house that stole decades of my life. Instead, I tucked Lily into bed, read her a story, and sat beside her until she fell asleep with her hand curled around mine. Later that night, I stepped onto the balcony. The city below shimmered with 1,000 lights. The wind was cold, but the air in my lungs felt clean. I wasn't the girl who'd been humiliated at a Christmas dinner table. I wasn't the daughter who grew up invisible. I wasn't the sister they mocked. I was the woman who walked away, the woman who built an empire, the woman who chose peace. A voicemail appeared on my phone then. I recognized the number. It was from Vermont. I didn't listen to it. I deleted it without hesitation. The snow began to fall again, soft and slow. I wrapped my arms around myself and whispered into the night, "We're almost there. Almost free. Almost whole. Almost ready for the life I deserved." I woke to the sound of rain against the window, steady and rhythmic, like the universe was reminding me to breathe. Lily was still asleep, curled into a tight little ball, her fox tucked beneath her chin. I brushed a curl from her forehead, kissed her cheek, and slipped out of the room quietly. Today felt different, not heavy, not chaotic, just pivotal in a way I couldn't yet name. Coffee warmed my hands as I stood on the balcony overlooking the Sound. The water was gray and restless, reflecting the clouds above it. Seattle in winter always felt like a mirror, showing you exactly where you stood, whether you were ready or not. When I came back inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. The board wants to move the Aurora Foundation meeting to 2. Also, your family emailed the company again. I blocked them, but for your information, I typed quickly. Thank you. Leave everything else as is. I hesitated before adding another message. And Zoe, I appreciate you. Her reply came instantly. Always, boss. You deserve people who have your back. I exhaled slowly, grateful for the steadiness of the people around me, people I chose. After breakfast, I helped Lily gather her school things. She wore her pink raincoat, the one with the tiny stars embroidered along the sleeves. Do you think it will snow again? She asked, handing me her lunchbox. Maybe, I said. The weather likes to surprise us. She grinned and slipped her hand into mine. Her small fingers grounded me more than anything else could. When I dropped her off, she hugged me tightly. Come, get me early. If it snows, I will. I watched her run inside her backpack, bouncing with each step. My heart expanded and ached at the same time. Everything I was doing, every boundary, every silence, every cut rope was for her. Back at home, I prepared for the foundation meeting. Documents spread out across my desk, proposals, budgets, testimonials from single mothers applying for grants. The Aurora Foundation was becoming bigger than I ever imagined. A place for women who had been overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside. Women like me. At 1:30, I headed to the Northbridge office. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me upward. And when the doors opened, a wave of familiarity washed over me, keyboards clicking, hushed problem-solving conversations, engineers gathered around whiteboards full of equations. This was my world, my creation, my proof that I had built something stronger than my past. Grace, Zoe called out the moment she saw me. Everything set in the conference room, thank you. She leaned closer. And just so you know, your hair looks amazing today. Big meeting energy. I laughed. I'll take the compliment. Inside the conference room, the board members were already seated. Charts projected onto the wall showed our growth trajectory, straight upward, steep, fierce. As I walked to the head of the table, a thought crossed my mind. My father would never understand this world, even if he lived 100 years. The meeting began. I spoke clearly, decisively. I outlined our expansion plan, the mentorship program we were launching, the safe space network for women leaving toxic environments. The board listened, nodding, scribbling notes. They respected me not because they had to, but because I earned it. Halfway through, Christopher slipped silently into the room. I hadn't expected him there, but he gave me a small, encouraging smile, and the tension in my shoulders eased. He was there on behalf of Solaris Energy, one of our new partners. When the meeting ended, the room buzzed with excitement. People shook my hand, congratulated me, asked follow-up questions. I felt strong, commanding, untouchable. As the room cleared, Christopher approached. You were incredible, he said. Seriously. You made every other presentation look like kindergarten show and tell. I laughed softly. Thank you. I'm glad you were here. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm going to say something, and I hope it doesn't cross a line. My stomach fluttered. Go ahead. You carry the world like it's weightless, he said quietly. But it isn't. You deserve someone who sees how heavy it is and still chooses to stand beside you. His words were gentle but honest, and they caught on something raw inside me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I breathed. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Before I could respond, Zoe burst through the door, her eyes wide. Grace, sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. She handed me her tablet. On the screen was a local Vermont news article titled, Former Community Leader Faces Financial Crisis Amid Trust Fund Collapse. A photo accompanied it, my father standing on the porch with my mother, both looking strained, exhausted, older than I remembered. My mother's hand clutched his arm tightly. His jaw was set, but his eyes looked defeated. Below the image, a quote, Our daughter refuses to help. We're praying for compassion. I stared at the screen, the words blurring for a second. Compassion. They were asking for compassion from strangers, something they had never once offered me. Christopher watched my face carefully. Grace, you don't have to read more. I know, Zoe exhaled. Do you want me to take this down from your feed? People are tagging you? Yes, I said. Block tags, disable mentions, on it. When she left, Christopher stepped closer. You don't owe them the life you built. I know, I said again, but my voice was quieter. He reached out, brushing a thumb over my wrist. But you do owe yourself peace. His words settled deep, warm. I'm trying, I whispered. You're doing more than trying. I swallowed hard. They're unraveling. People who built their comfort on someone else's sacrifice always unravel when the truth shows up, he said. I let out a shaky breath. I thought seeing them fall apart would feel vindicating. But it doesn't. That's because you're not cruel, he said. You're just done. The simplicity of the statement made something inside me loosen. We left the office together. Outside, the sky was clearing, streaks of blue fighting through the clouds. We walked in silence until we reached the parking lot. Dinner sometime, he asked softly. My heart fluttered again. Yes. He smiled, warm and certain. Then I'll call you. When I drove home, I felt strangely calm. Detached, but in a healing way. As if a storm had passed and I was finally examining the damage with clear eyes. When I walked into the apartment, Lily ran to me. Mommy. It didn't snow, but guess what? I made a penguin in art class. That sounds perfect. She chattered happily about her day as I cooked dinner. Afterward, we read stories on the couch, her head resting on my chest. The kind of evening that soothed every bruise on my heart. When I tucked her into bed, she whispered, I love our life. I kissed her forehead. Me too. Later that night, I lit a single candle and sat on the balcony, the flame flickering gently in the cold air. Below me, the city sparkled alive, vibrant, full of possibility. Another voicemail appeared from Vermont. I deleted it without listening. Tonight wasn't for them. Tonight was for everything I had become, and everything I was still becoming. The morning of the gala arrived with a strange calmness, the kind that felt like standing at the edge of a quiet ocean before the waves returned. I woke before my alarm, staring at the soft shadows on the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the heater. For once, my mind wasn't racing. It just rested. Lily padded into my room, holding her fox by the ear. Mommy, can I wear my sparkly shoes tonight? You absolutely can, I said, pulling her into a hug. You can sparkle as much as you want. She giggled and climbed onto the bed, her curls forming a warm halo around her face as she settled beside me. The Aurora Foundation's Winter Gala had grown into a major event. Sponsors from all over the tech world, influential leaders, entrepreneurs, women who had survived more than most people could imagine. And tonight I was giving the keynote. A year ago I wouldn't have believed any of this was possible. Now it felt like the next natural step. Lily and I ate breakfast together, talking about her art project and the snow the forecast kept promising but never delivered. After dropping her off at school, I went straight to the Northbridge campus for a prep meeting. Zoe greeted me with a clipboard, 3 coffees, and an expression that said she'd been awake far too long. Everything's lined up, the venue's set. The press list is confirmed. And before you ask, yes, we filtered the RSVP list. No one from Vermont will be within 100 miles of this thing? I blinked. Zoe. What, I don't trust them. They look like the type who'd crash an event for free food. I snorted. Thank you, always. Inside the conference room, the Aurora team reviewed the schedule, the welcome speech, the video packages, the donor acknowledgements, the panel of single mothers who had graduated from our program. Every detail was polished, intentional, purposeful. But the real emotional weight came when we reviewed one particular video, stories from 3 women whose lives had changed because of the foundation's grants. A nurse who returned to school. A mother of 2 who now worked in cybersecurity. A survivor who became a data analyst for a major firm. Their voices filled the room with truth, I swallowed hard. This is exactly why we built Aurora. Zoe squeezed my arm. They're you, Grace. And now they get to build something new because you did. The warmth in my chest threatened to spill over, but I kept myself steady. Tonight wasn't about me. It was about every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. By noon, I left the office to pick up a dress I'd ordered weeks ago, a deep navy gown that reminded me of quiet night skies and second beginnings. Christopher texted while I waited at the boutique, "Are you ready for tonight? Or should I bring calming tea?" And a backup speech, I smiled and typed, "I'm ready, mostly." His reply came instantly. "You're going to be extraordinary." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because something fluttered in my chest that I wasn't ready to examine. Back home, I got Lily ready first. Her sparkly shoes matched her twirling dress perfectly, and she insisted on wearing a tiny silver star clip in her hair. When she spun around, the fabric shimmered like moonlight. "Mommy, you look like a queen," she said when I finished getting dressed. My throat tightened. "And you look like magic." We arrived at the venue early. The lobby glowed with soft lights, evergreen garlands, and glass ornaments suspended from the ceiling like floating stars. Cameras flashed as donors and guests arrived, but the attention rolled off me easily. Tonight wasn't about putting on a performance. It was about purpose. As the hall filled, I moved through the crowd, greeting partners, hugging graduates of our programs, thanking sponsors. Every conversation reminded me why I was here. Not because of money, not because of prestige, but because of the women who deserved a shot at the future that had once been denied to me. When the lights dimmed and the music softened, Zoe tapped my shoulder. "It's time." I walked backstage, adjusting the microphone on my dress. My heart wasn't pounding, just steady, strong, ready. But before I stepped onto the stage, I saw a familiar figure standing near the curtains. Christopher. He wasn't dressed in a suit like the other men. He wore a dark blazer and a soft gray shirt, understated but confident. He offered me a small smile. "Breathe," he said gently. "I am good. Now go show them what you're made of." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and stepped forward as the spotlight warmed my face. The room grew silent. Hundreds of eyes focused on me, and I began. When I was a little girl, I said, my voice steady. I learned early that silence was safer than truth. That shrinking yourself makes other people more comfortable. That invisibility protects you. I swallowed, letting the weight of those memories settle. But invisibility doesn't build futures. It doesn't build companies. It doesn't build daughters who believe they deserve joy. I saw faces soften, hands still, breath held. So tonight I continued. We celebrate women who refuse to disappear. I spoke about single mothers who coded while their children slept. About survivors who rebuilt careers from ashes. About women who stepped out of the shadows society pushed them into. I spoke from the deepest place in me, the place that remembered what it felt like to walk away with nothing but determination. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, loud, full, rising like a wave. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. As I stepped off stage, Christopher was waiting. That, he said, was extraordinary. His voice was soft but certain, and when he touched my arm, his hand was warm, steady in a way I hadn't known I needed. "Thank you," I whispered. Lily hurried over with Zoe, jumping into my arms. "Mommy, you talked like a superhero," I laughed. "Did I?" She nodded and held my face between her hands. "You were brave." Her words hit harder than any applause. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, photos, and laughter. Guests drifted home. The hall slowly emptied. Eventually, only a few staff members remained, packing equipment and clearing tables. I walked outside onto the balcony overlooking the city. The night was crisp, the air sharp, the skyline glowing beneath a clear sky. Christopher stepped beside me. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Yes. You deserve every good thing that comes next." I turned to him slowly. "I'm learning how to believe that." "You're allowed to believe it," he said quietly. You're allowed to want things for yourself. The air between us shifted gentle electric reel. He didn't move closer. He didn't rush me. He simply waited. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't pull away. The city lights flickered below us, my breath fogged in the cold air. His presence was calm, steady, warm. "Grace," he said softly, "you don't have to be alone anymore." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle. Then I opened them again, and whispered back, "Maybe I'm ready not to be." The wind carried the words into the night, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I needed to outrun. It felt like something I could walk toward. The morning after the gala felt strangely gentle, as if the world had softened just a little overnight. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor, warming the hardwood and the blanket Lily had kicked off during her early morning cartoon marathon. She was lying on her stomach, humming, coloring a page filled with stars and tiny robots. Her legs swung back and forth in the air, each movement light and carefree. I stood at the kitchen counter, stirring honey into my tea, letting the quiet fill me. So much had changed in a year. So much had changed in a week. If someone had told me 12 months ago that I'd be standing here strong, steady, and free, I wouldn't have believed them. "Mommy," Lily asked, turning her head. "Can we go to the beach later?" "In December," I teased. "Won't it be cold?" she giggled. "We can wear hats." I smiled. "Okay, hats it is." She bounced back to her coloring, already satisfied. While she drew, I opened my laptop. A handful of emails waited. Congratulations on the gala, inquiries from potential partners, a thank you message from one of the mothers who had spoken on stage. My heart warmed as I read her words. "You made me believe in myself again." But the message that struck deepest wasn't from a stranger. It was from Christopher. "Last night was unforgettable. Breakfast later." Just the two of us, without microphones this time. I touched the edge of the screen, lightly surprised by how natural the question felt. How easy, how right. Before I could reply, someone knocked gently on the door. For a heartbeat, fear washed through me. Then I checked the security feed. It wasn't my family. It was the building manager holding a small envelope. When I opened the door, he handed it to me. "This arrived for you downstairs." It was marked confidential. I thanked him and set it on the counter. My hands hesitated a moment, then I tore the seal. Inside was a single folded letter. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My father's. The familiar heaviness punched through my chest for half a second before dissolving into something calmer, distance, perspective, peace. The letter wasn't long. "Grace, your mother told me what happened at the gala. She said you spoke about strength and survival. I watched the news segment. You looked confident, happy, successful in a way I never understood. I was wrong. About you, about many things. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know if I deserve it, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Take care of yourself and that little girl." Dad, I reread the words twice. Not because they hurt, but because they didn't. For the first time, my father's voice no longer echoed inside me like a verdict. The apology didn't reopen anything. It didn't demand anything. It was just a period at the end of a sentence I'd already finished writing. I folded the letter and placed it gently in the drawer, not with the guilt-soaked messages of the past, but with the few things I'd chosen to keep. Not because I needed it, but because Lily deserved to know that even broken people sometimes tried to be better. "Mommy, what's that?" Lily asked from the couch. "Just a letter," I said softly. "Nothing we need to worry about." She nodded, accepting that answer completely. Later that morning, I texted Christopher. "Breakfast sounds perfect," he replied with a smile emoji and an address near the waterfront. When I dropped Lily off at her friend's holiday playdate, she hugged me tightly. "Come back soon, I will. Have fun." The cafe Christopher chose overlooked the water, with a fireplace crackling in the corner and the smell of cinnamon drifting through the air. When I walked in, he stood immediately, a warmth in his eyes that made my heart flutter. "You look rested," he said, pulling out my chair. "I actually slept," I admitted. "That's new." We talked for over an hour about the gala, about his mother visiting for New Year's, about Lily's desire to build a robot that can talk to dogs. Every moment felt light, unrushed, like a breath I'd been waiting to take for years. At one point, he reached across the table, brushing his fingers against mine. "You don't have to rush anything," he said. "I'm here, however you need me." I swallowed, my voice softer than I expected. "I know." And I did, truly. After breakfast, we walked along the pier, the cold air nipping at our cheeks. He bought Lily a small stuffed penguin from a gift kiosk, promising she could name it later. I tucked it into my purse, imagining the squeal she'd make when she saw it. Before we parted, he paused. "Grace," he said, "you've built something incredible. A life worth living. A life worth protecting. Anyone who made you feel small, they never knew you at all." My breath caught. "Thank you. I'm proud of you," he said. "And I'm excited for whatever comes next." This time I didn't shy away from the warmth rising in my chest. "Me too," I whispered. Back at home, I found Lily sitting on the floor with a group of kids from the playdate, each one wearing hats and mittens, pretending the living room rug was an ice rink. She saw me and ran over immediately. "Mommy, we're penguins." "Are you?" I laughed. "Yes, and guess what, I have a surprise too." She grabbed my purse, dug inside, and found the penguin plush. When she saw it, her eyes lit up. "Did you get me this?" Christopher picked it out. She smiled so big it practically swallowed her face. "I love it." She hugged it to her chest and twirled back to her friends. I watched her with a quiet realization blooming inside me. This life, the one we built out of broken pieces, was whole. Not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. The day drifted into evening. After the playdate ended, Lily and I walked to the beach, bundled in scarves and mittens. The sun was setting low, turning the sky pink and gold, the water reflecting streaks of light like molten metal. Lily stomped footprints in the wet sand, holding her penguin high above her head. "Look, he likes the ocean," I laughed. "I think he does." We sat together at the shoreline, waves brushing close but never touching our shoes. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and winter. "Mommy," Lily asked, leaning against me. "Are we happy now?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "Yes, baby, we are." She nodded as if she'd known all along. "Good. Then we can stay here forever." Forever sounds just right. We stayed until the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. When we walked back home hand in hand, I felt a peace so deep it settled into my bones. Not the brittle peace of silence. Real peace. Earned peace. The kind built from truth, boundaries, love, and the courage to walk away from anything that dimmed who you were meant to become. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep with her penguin curled beside her, I stood alone on the balcony. The city shimmered below, reflected in the calm water of the Sound. I closed my eyes and whispered the truth that had been waiting in my chest all year. I'm free. And for the first time in decades, the word didn't feel like a dream. It felt like home. If you've ever had to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth, I hope you know this: choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the moment your real story begins. If this journey touched you, tell me in the comments what part reminded you of your own strength. And if you'd like more stories of resilience, justice, and second chances, stay with me, like, subscribe, and keep walking this path together.